Pixel art is hard. This is especially true if, like me, you are not an artist. Yet, in the last 4 weeks, I have managed to go from this to this. So it looks like I'm learning a few things. And in this devlog, I'd like to share that growth with you and also show how it's contributing to the overall development of my dream game, Willard. Coming into this project, I knew art was going to be a challenge. Some of you may remember this throwback to the 80s.
It's a cereal! Wow!
I grew up without the internet, so when childhood me wanted to draw my favorite game characters, I would literally wait for commercials like this to come on, try to remember what they looked like, and then frantically search for a piece of paper to record the images. The results have not been preserved for posterity, and that's probably better for everyone. As much as childhood me wanted to be an artist, I didn't understand proportion, depth, human physiology, and I didn't have enough control to even draw proper circles or straight lines. I just couldn't seem to art. My art skills really didn't improve much as I got older either. Don't get me wrong, I have a decent eye for color and composition. I generally know what looks good, but I just cannot draw. So, coming into this project, I figured the solution to my problem was probably to use a retro tile-based pixel art style. Even then, I've dabbled in pixel art enough to know that it can be really hard. So I set my sights on a style that harkens back to the Sega Master System. There's a beautiful simplicity to the bright, tile-based graphics of games like Alex Kidd and Miracle World. And despite their low pixel count, games like Wonder Boy and Monsterland still have a certain charm. So, with the style in mind, I got to work. I should start by saying that I did come to this project with some skills. I spent a number of years working in RPG Maker, and during this time I would often use GIMP and later Photoshop to edit sprites. This usually just meant recoloring sprites or copy-pasting spiderweb sprites on top of environment tiles, that sort of thing. I didn't create my own graphics, but I was proficient with editing software. So now that I was ready to create my own assets, I started off by Googling pixel character art. Ferret has a great character art tutorial that I started with. This one created a low pixel count character with skinny limbs. This seemed like an easy style, so I tried it out. These were my first results, and I was super proud of them. I created some simple, beveled dirt tiles as well, and before long I had my first scene. As happy as I was with this first progress, the style didn't quite sit right with me though. A little while later I found another character art tutorial, this one by Reece Geofroy. Sorry if I said that wrong. This style seemed to suit my project better, but what I really loved about this tutorial was how there are some tips that you can use to adapt this character design to make many different characters using the same model. I still knew I wasn't at the end of my journey, but these were good enough that I thought they might make it into the game as NPCs, and I could use them for now to get started on the rest of my project. At this point, I was ready to create some environments. I said earlier that I'm not great at drawing straight lines and circles, but fortunately for me, Photoshop can do these things for me. When working on my first city graphics, I started by creating the ingredients that would make up the houses: bricks, timber, windows, roof tiles, etc. I found some good reference pictures to guide my building, and then started assembling the buildings themselves. This process came much more naturally to me, as I didn't have to draw much, but could just use geometric shapes to create more complex images. With my first buildings created, it was clear that I needed some backgrounds. My first background was this mountainside. Admittedly, this is more vector art than pixel art, but I was super proud of how the mountains looked. That said, when you play the game, the mountains lose a little something close up. For my next attempt, I tried adding two things. First, I worked from an actual color palette that I found online. Although I have a decent eye for color, I was hearing from a lot of actual artists that using a palette is a good way to make sure your colors really work together. I also added layers this time, which created the possibility of parallax scrolling. For my next background, I decided to use my trip to Jasper National Park as inspiration. I described this in more detail in my second devlog, so I won't talk too much about this here. The big thing that I learned from this one though, was how to give my environments real details by including actual flora from the real world, and by using real life locations as inspiration. I knew that my Hershey chocolate bar tiles weren't going to work for this one too, so I got down to creating a new tile set that had corners and cliffs and hills. I love this environment. but when I added my sprites, it felt like it didn't totally match. So, I created specific tree sprites that matched my characters better and rebuilt the scene. I was quite pleased with these results. Next, I decided to take the concepts I'd learned to the next level and create a forest scene. I created another tree, this time a balsam poplar, added some rock sprites, some ground cover bushes, and a lot of animation. The result was a much more full, more alive looking scene. I showed off my new developments in my third devlog, and I received a lot of encouraging comments from viewers. Thanks so much, everyone. At this point, I also received some really helpful suggestions and constructive criticisms. One viewer encouraged me on my progress, but noted that some scenes felt a little cluttered. Another liked the art, but pointed out that the players sometimes got lost in the backgrounds. One viewer, an art student and graphic art intern, took the time to write me a detailed message about scene composition and suggest some tips about using black and white filters to get a better idea of color values, and how to recognize when a scene's too busy. With these new tips, I was anxious to start work on my next environment. Additionally, I just returned from a 6-day trip to Whitehorse with my son, and I particularly wanted to take some scenery from along the way and use it as inspiration. I started work on the water, creating 6 different layers that moved independently to create depth and add vibrancy to the level. Along with the water, I needed a ground tile set that could match the rocky beach from Muncho Lake. My version ended up looking more stone-like than the real thing, but I still quite like it. At this point, I took my watercolor and then matched it to a palette I found on coolers.co. Using this palette, I started working on my mountains, making each mountain a separate layer so that I could use parallax scrolling to make the scene have more depth. In addition to all this, I leveled the skinny lodgepole pines up north, and I knew that I wanted them to be a cornerstone of my level design. I set to designing the tree and was really happy with the outcome. At this point though, I realized that I liked my tree a lot better without any outlining on it. Previously, I'd been outlining all of my trees. I decided to get some feedback. I went back to my balsam poplar design from my earlier forest level. I created 2 short videos, one of my beach scene with the tree having outlining and one without the outlining. I then took to Twitter and asked my roughly 30 followers which they liked better. The response was startling. By the end of the weekend, I had about 1,500 views, my follower count swelled to almost 100, and I had about 23 comments weighing in. The vast majority agreed that I should go with no outline. Some provided helpful suggestions, and quite a few noted that outlining is generally reserved for objects that are interactable. Finally understood why my last scene looked so cluttered. I was making literally every object look like an interactable one. At the end of the day, I have learned a lot, and there's still so much more that I've yet to learn. I know there's no easy answers. Art takes time and practice. I know that getting feedback from more accomplished artists and from game lovers in general is going to be key to my growth. And I also know that I'm loving every minute of this journey. There's lots more that I could tell you. My character art has grown in leaps and bounds, but I detail some of that process in my third devlog, so you can check that out if you're interested. Now, I finally have assets that represent my desired style for Willard, and that I think might make it into the final version of the game. With these assets built, I've already begun work on puzzle mechanics and the beginnings of making this game playable. Thanks for joining me on this part of the journey. If you're enjoying the ride, please like and subscribe. Until next time, this is Matt with Nightrun Studio. Cheers.